Okay, the next thing we're going to do is going to be showing how to operate the compressor to fill bottles and fill the storage. Before we start the compressor, you want to do some pre-operation checks. What they're going to be is you're going to check the power source, make sure that it's intact and there's no damage. Check the top of the compressor and make sure there's nothing that could interfere with the airflow. Ensure that the air in the area that you're operating is clear of exhaust gases, smoke, or fumes. And then the last thing you're going to do is check the compressor oil level at the compressor. So to operate the compressor, we're going to utilize our hearing protection, and also if you're filling bottles, helmet and gloves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up to the X4 controller, and what we're going to do is going to hit, first thing you do is hit the F2 button to begin. The next thing you're going to see is going to give you a list of when the air samples due, which is going to be quarterly. When the CO calibration is due, which same thing, that's going to be quarterly. And then the hours remaining on the filters. Below that, you'll see operate, info, and service. The two that we'll be using are going to be operate and info. And so before you start the compressor, you're going to want to fill out the compressor log, which is going to be located on a clipboard right here. It'll ask for the date, the oil level, the starting hours, the ending hours, and number of bottles, etc. It's pretty self-explanatory. So before we start, you're going to want to come up to the info section. So hit info. Next, you're going to hit F1 for service data. And you can see it'll give you a list of information, including the temperature, the CO reading, and then DP is dew point, which this does not have a dew point sensor. So what we're going to do is hit next. And that's what we're looking for, is the hour meter. So before you start the compressor, you're going to want to note the hours. It's going to give you 10 hours, as this one says, and then 50 minutes. And then you can continue to scroll through and see information on the life of the purifier elements, and then air sample, etc. So once you go all the way through, it'll give you the option to repeat or exit. So we'll hit exit, F3. It'll bring you back to the main menu. So to start again, you hit F2. Next, we're going to go to operate. And it'll give you the option between auto and manual. And we're going to be running the compressor in the auto mode. Essentially what that does is it'll build up the pressure to 6,000, and then it'll essentially cut out the system. If the pressure drops 500 psi below that, it'll automatically kick back on. Whereas the manual mode, it'll just run one cycle. Once it builds up to 6,000, it'll do its dump cycle, and then it'll shut off. And no matter what the pressure drops in the system, it won't turn back on unless you manually press run again. So we're going to hit auto, and then it'll tell you press start button to turn the compressor on, which is going to be the green button right here. So you're going to hit start, and then I'll hit that here in a second. It's going to get kind of loud. But a couple other things to notice is right now our compressors, the pressure's already at 5,500, so it's not going to really run that long. But normally if it's down at 0, or if the ASME tanks are really low and it's down at 0 starting, you'll notice it'll start to slowly build up pressure, and you'll have your flow meters 50-50 adjustment right here. So right now it's red because there's no air flowing through it, but once it builds up to 2,500 psi, you need to check this flow meter and make sure it's 50% green and 50% red. And what that does is, by adjusting this little thumb control, it'll allow a predetermined amount of air to go past the CO sensor, so it gets an accurate reading. And so like I said, once the compressor pressure builds up to 2,500, then you're going to adjust that to 50-50. All right, continuing on the compressor, once you get to the auto mode and you're ready to press start, it'll build up pressure, and then before the system shuts down, it'll go through essentially a drain and a dump cycle, and then it'll shut down on its own. One other thing to note below the emergency stop, we're not going to use that unless it's a complete emergency. If you do, it's very hard on the compressor because it immediately shuts it down, and it'll timestamp a emergency stop on the compressor, which could possibly void the warranty. So don't do that unless you really have to do it. So once you are ready to start the compressor, we went through all the checks and through the menu, and now we're going to hit start, and we're going to let it build up pressure and then go through its dump cycle. Okay, now that the compressor has shut down, we're going to go over a few things since I couldn't really talk when it was running. You can see we're still in automatic mode. The compressor shut down. It went through its cool down cycle, and it's basically in the standby position right now. Anytime the operator is operating the compressor, they need to be with the compressor. So once it gets to this point, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit F2, exit, and that'll take you back to this automatic mode. Press start. What you're going to want to do is when you're completely done using the compressor, you're going to hit back and then back again, and it'll bring you to the home screen. And at this point, when it's in the home screen like this, if the compressor pressure drops for any reason, it's still not going to automatically turn on. So that way you don't have to worry about the compressor running for whatever reason if there's a leak in the system. A couple other things to talk about that we couldn't talk about when it was running was once the compressor starts running and kind of starts to get warmed up, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just test it by hitting the drain button. And what the drain button will do is it'll ensure that the moisture separators are operating, and it'll activate a 15-second drain cycle to remove condensation from the moisture separators. And the compressor will automatically activate the drain cycles at regular intervals when it's operating. So you just want to hit that initially when it's running. And then a couple of other things that you can see on here is you're going to have a stop button. And that stop button is in order to shut down the compressor, and it won't shut it down immediately because it'll still go through a 2-minute cool down cycle. But for whatever reason, say you get a call and you're in the middle of operating the compressor, you can hit the stop button. It'll go through a 2-minute cool down, and then it'll shut the compressor off. Like I said, we're not going to use this emergency stop unless it's a complete emergency. And during that 2-minute cool down cycle, which it'll do once it builds up pressure to cut out, the compressor will run what they call unloaded, and it'll continue to operate, but it won't build any pressure, and it'll allow the moisture traps to open and drain the moisture separators. Additionally, when you hit that drain button, you should be able to see on the gauges on the compressor that the pressure should drop in those gauges. If the pressure is not dropping in any of the gauges, then that could be a problem with the system, and we'll have to get a service tech out to take a look at it. One other thing we're going to look at on the compressor is when you're operating the compressor, there's going to be a couple alarm and shutdown parameters. The first one's going to be the air temperature. So it's going to alarm at 470 degrees, and then it'll shut down the system at 495 degrees. And then also the carbon monoxide sensor. It'll alarm at 4 parts per million, and it'll shut down at 6 parts per million. And if you're operating the system, you can't see it right now because we're not actually operating it, but when it's operating, you'll have the readings of the CO and the temperature. If for whatever reason your CO or your air temperature starts to build up into alarm levels, what you can do is you can hit the purge button, and what that'll do is it'll purge the air in the compressor so that that bad air, that potentially bad air, won't go into your storage, and it'll continue to purge until the alarm levels come into a normal range. And then once it does come into a normal range, it'll say stop. You hit the stop button, and then it'll allow you to continue and operate the compressor. And if that does happen, remember to check the flow control, and then make sure there's not things like the apparatus running in the app bays or in the shop or anything like that.